I am Dr. Cindy Dupuy. I have a PhD in learning disabilities. I do diagnostic assessment, intervention, and advocacy, and I'm also an adult with dyslexia and dysgraphia.
My name is Kim Sharman. I've worked with kids for the last 15 years in regards to dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADHD, and other issues regarding academia.
So today we're gonna backfill everybody as we begin to move forward in teaching how to teach reading, how to teach writing, all of those kinds of things. And this is where we want to talk about task analysis. Now, I had another descriptor and you said, Cindy, I don't like that. And we came up with what's the source of the error. Is that right?
Yes.
Because oftentimes parents don't understand what's happening with a kid and why you've taught a concept and they just don't seem to understand it. And so I wanted to do this. Let's teach you how to break it down so that when you're going back to analyze why your student doesn't have a concept, you know which methodology to use, because we're going to talk about that in the future. Okay. So, what is your understanding of task analysis? I mean, you basically learned it off of me, right?
Right. I think of task analysis as forensic forensic psychology. I have to look and identify when I see the error that's made, and then I see the error, then I have to identify what is the reason for the error, and that takes time. And I go through a series of steps to define: is it a conceptual problem? Is it a misinterpretation or a misreading problem? There's lots of different things it could be. So you can't just assume. You must go deeper as a parent.
Excellent. Okay. So we're going to give a really basic task analysis example here. And this is how I learned it when I was in graduate school at Northwestern. And so I'm going to stop share here for a second and I'm going to flip to my camera here. And we're going to talk about what does it take to be able to brush your teeth. So I have grabbed toothpaste, I've grabbed a toothbrush. So Kim, what's one of the first things that you have to be able to do?
You have to be able to know what the outcome is that you're trying to do. You have to be able to unscrew the toothpaste and toothbrush. I mean, the toothpaste, and be
First
able
thing
to
you have to be able to do is hold the tooth,
hold it.
right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I intentionally brought out two different kinds of toothpaste for what you just said, because this one requires that you be able to flip a cap, and this one requires that you be able to twist a top. And the thing that I would encourage you to do is pretend that your thumb doesn't work. Now, how do you get the top off the toothpaste, right? So if my thumb is out of action, I can use to flip that one, but getting this one to unscrew is way harder. That would take using two hands to be able to get there, right? So we get the cap off the toothpaste, whatever method that is. Now it's the next big challenge, Kim.
How do we make sure, how much toothpaste do we need to put? As you know, little kids will put huge globs.
Yeah, so they can't control the output, right? And then you've got to get it all closed back up again, right? And
Right.
there's a bunch of other steps along the way, and we didn't want to go too deep into that, but we want people to kind of understand the process in it of you got to hold the toothbrush, you've got to be able to open the container, how much toothpaste you put on, can you get the water turned on, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a classic example of task analysis. And somebody cannot be brushing their teeth because they can't hold the toothbrush. Somebody can not be brushing the teeth because they can't get the container open. Somebody can't be brushing their teeth because they can't get toothpaste on the toothbrush, et cetera, et cetera. So now we want to talk about that with regard to academics. Now, you and I have a pet peeve when we talk to teachers, because what's the first thing that many teachers unknowingly say?
A lot of times they say you're not paying attention to detail, you're distracted, or you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are the pretty classic ones. And teachers come to that frustration because they don't know why the errors are occurring. I've explained it very well. Everybody else in the class got it. So there must be something you're doing wrong because it can't be my teaching. And when you don't know anything to try and redirect what's happening, it gets really frustrating. Really,
And,
really frustrating.
and in teachers' defense too, you've got 30 kids in the classroom and you're trying to analyze why 10 different kids are not getting it.
Right. Okay. Now you said something else really interesting, and that was about the layers. Talk about layers for you for a minute.
The layers of investigating why a kid is not having the correct outcome.
Mhm.
A lot of times I call it forensic test analysis. Like when the parent says, I don't know why she got A's in all her homework, but she's flunking the test or
Mhm.
she's doing poorly. So I literally have to go in to the school, look at the test and identify whether it's a conceptual problem. They don't really understand the concept of adding and subtracting fractions, example, or is it a misreading problem that because of their dyslexia, they're having trouble understanding what they're reading. And so they're doing the incorrect operation, let's say on a word problem or a history problem. And so I definitely have to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And I have to usually test the kid and ask them questions in order to find that out too.
Okay. Now, all of that detective work is super important because that helps us drive the intervention, right?
Correct.
So I'm going to teach you a concept. I'm going to use a particular methodology. We're going to walk you through systematically how you teach decoding. And then when a kid is not getting the concept that you want them to get, that's where we're going to say, okay, now you need to try X, Y, or Z to address that underlying lack of success. So what we wanted to do was give a core academic example. And what we'd like all of you out there to do is hit pause on the recording. And I want you to spend some time looking at the answers on all of these to try and figure out what happened where. Okay. And take as much time as you need to think through what happened and take a couple of notes. And then when you're ready, come back to this. So go ahead and hit pause. And if you've joined us back again, you've now done your analysis. So Kim, we created these. Why did we create these specific examples?
Because we see it all the time. We see these types of errors, especially with kids, believe it or not, with dysgraphia, which we won't go into now, but it happens all the time.
Yeah.
These errors.
So the first one is, in our case, pretty classic. Why do we call it classic?
A kid is not it's classic because it is very evidentiary with kids not paying attention to the sign that is being done, represented for the math problem. When kids are given that big math sheet of problems to do and they jump into it.
And they get in a mindset of, oh, these are all going to be addition. And so they don't attend to that operational sign. Okay. And you can see that just with the carrying. Okay. In the second example, what do we have going on here?
Well, at first, as a parent, you say, hey, it looks right. 14 minus 8 is 6. But what did they do incorrectly? They don't have the concept correctly of borrowing a 10. They borrowed a 10 from the hundreds column and they deleted a 10 from the tens column.
Right? And so they've done the procedure, elements of the procedure correctly, but they're not understanding the concept of borrowing and the exchanges that happen there. Okay. All right, let's take a look at our third problem.
Wow,
What
it looks like
happened
they did
here?
everything right. What's the problem? Well, look at the outcome. When they subtracted 8 from 15, they got the wrong factual answer.
That's a retrieval issue, right? We talk about, am I going into my brain? Am I pulling the right file? In this case, the kid pulled the wrong answer file, right? They pulled up 15 minus 8 is 8 instead of 15 minus 8 is 7.
And math facts can be very, very difficult for people who have dysgraphia. They can't remember the picture of the math fact. Yeah. So they pulled the wrong one.
Okay, now we put in this last one and you're like, why are we doing this? And do you remember why I said we were doing this one?
Well, because a lot of times they got the right answer. So why they didn't get the problem wrong.
Right, they got it right.
But you'll notice that a lot of kids who can't stand putting the pencil to paper, they have trouble with writing, they didn't provide any evidence of how they did it.
And so a teacher then says, oh, you punched it into a calculator.
Or
Where's
you
your work?
looked at your friend, or you looked at your friend's paper on a test.
Right. And
And
so my husband does all these calculations in his head and never shows his work. Like he just doesn't write it down on the page, which, by the way, as we get into more complex math, is mental gymnastics.
very difficult to identify where you went wrong when you do a multi-step algebra problem without writing anything down.
Yeah.
And they
So,
will mark it wrong. So
yeah, teacher will mark it wrong all the time. If you don't show your work, you get 0 credit. So this again forms that foundation of you going in. When a kid makes a mistake, the goal is to go backwards to try and figure out where the error is. Because once you go back in and you correct this, we would say you need a scribe, right? That we need some way for you to show what you know. Here we would say, hey, we need to have your addition, subtraction, multiplication table accessible to you, or a calculator to check your work. Here we would say we need to go back and we need to reteach a concept around borrowing.
yes.
And here we would say, hey, before you go in to do a problem, you need to mark the operational sign so that you know what you're doing.
When you say mark, Cindy, I think you mean I have them actually highlight them.
You can highlight them. I have students underline addition, circle subtraction, and box multiplication, and the act of doing that.
Okay.
You can highlight, and what I would say even more is I would love you to color code the highlighting, right? So we're going to do subtraction in one color, we're going to do addition in another color, we're going to do multiplication in a third color. So that visual, what am I doing and why, can be super important.
I mean, whatever the kid wants to do to make them pay attention to the sign.
Yeah. So with that, that is the concept of task analysis. And as we go through, when we start teaching you how to teach reading and written language, we want you to do this kind of analysis when your student doesn't get a concept so that you can come back in, correct the underlying issue, and begin to move forward.